Great. Probably should have started this. And Rick.
Yeah, I'm still working on the title too, but essentially, how can AI help humans connect better with each other?
Nice. And Kelly.
It has a fantastic title somewhere, but we're investigating together how to use our bodies and movement to get unstuck.
Nice. And Alyssa.
Mine is why OD needs lean and lean needs OD.
Nice. I would love to tell you that this actually came up in a meeting I had earlier today. And I was like, oh, you've got to go to this session when you're at conference. And they were very excited. Denise.
Trauma-informed workplaces and trauma-informed OD practices. Um, More to come on what that means.
Yes. More to come indeed. And Ty. Can you hear me, Ty?
Question is really Sherry's, but it's OD evolving future crafting for transformational impact.
Love it. Just that. I think that sounds amazing. So that should give everybody a little bit of a taste about what's coming next. So today we're going to run a sample. We're going to see what works, see what doesn't work. I am going to share my screen and we will get started. And just go ahead and let me know when you can see slides. Got it? Okay. All right. Today's session is about telling truth to power. This seems universal, and that's one of the reasons that we chose it as a sample. It says a consultant's dilemma, but truth is that if you are internal to an organization, it is even harder to stand up and really say difficult things to your leadership, right? If you're internal, part of the politics, part of a system, it really can be even harder than as a consultant. We are going to move through this fairly quickly. Again, as you can tell, I'm kind of losing my voice. So I am going to negotiate a situation where I get to stop talking. And all of you are going to bring your wisdom into the room. And that is the nature of a lab. So what we're going to do first is we're going to talk a little bit about what's this problem that we're naming that we usually don't talk about out loud. We're going to collect some stories from you all. Again, a chance for me to stop talking. And then we're going to just kind of popcorn brainstorm some ideas. I'll start, I have a couple in my pocket that I'll offer as suggestions. And then we're going to go into smaller groups of two or three, and we're going to build ourselves a tool to start solving for this issue. Hey, we say the problem. I'm going to actually change that in future slides to it's a challenge, right? And maybe we're not needing to solve it so much as we are needing to find strategic ways to engage with and move past, right? I'd love a show of hands in the room. Have you ever been in a situation with a client or a leader, internally or externally, and you knew something that you thought that they really needed to know, and also that they really didn't want to know? I mean, does anybody experience that? Yeah, most people. Another way that this can present is that they're just not ready to know, right? They're just not ready, that there is a narrative or something in their understanding. that just isn't ready to accept something different. 65% of consultants, and I actually would venture to guess that that number is probably really much larger. I mean, this comes from a Edelman Trust study that was done among consultants. My guess is that if you added in internal practitioners, that number would actually be higher. Say that they have had to soften or, that's interesting. Can you guys all still hear and see me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Some sort of user session has just expired, and I'm glad it's not this one. That's great. Uh, Projects are more likely to fail when we don't tell the truth, right? As OD practitioners or HR people or IO psychologists, if we're there to work with a human system, kind of our job is to uncover what's really going on, right? What's causing pain points? What's causing friction? And if we can't say that thing to our client and we don't really work on that thing, then we don't really succeed in the project that we're there to do, right? We may go around it and get some other things done, but chances are we're not going to succeed in what we showed up to do in the first place. And then 71% of internal practitioners say power dynamics prevent that honest feedback. I think part of the title that I really like is the to power part, and there are lots of discussions about power that we'll be having at the OD Out Loud in general. But why we stay silent? Mostly because it's uncomfortable, right? We don't want to lose our job. We don't want to lose our paycheck. I have had consultant friends tell me that they thought they would get fired and that the organization would just hire a new consultant who would tell them what they wanted to hear instead of what was really happening. And so there's that risk factor. Fred Miller, who's a great OD consultant and champion, once told me that he thought the biggest single largest challenge to organization development is that we don't tell the truth enough. And when we don't tell the truth enough, we can't succeed. And our clients don't trust us to succeed. Right? It's reciprocal. It's a spiral road. And so we need to be honest if we're going to actually build transformation. Any transformation requires discomfort. I took a neuroscience of change course, and in my 16 weeks of study, I asked her, I said, what would you summarize? She goes, there's only one thing you need to know. If you can't be uncomfortable, you cannot change. The end. Because the neural pathways in our brains that want to stay the same are easy and comfortable. Doing anything new requires creating new neural pathways that are always initially, excuse me, less comfortable than the thing we were doing before. So stick that in your pocket. One of the questions that that particular teacher suggested asking of clients, if they knew, is how comfortable are you with discomfort? How much does your team lean into discomfort or your organization? So I'm going to make space for some stories. I guarantee some people in this room have experienced something like this. I have experienced this with Rick, actually. We had a shared client at one point who was not ready to hear certain things. And so I'd love to see a show of hands, and then I'm going to pick a couple people, and we're just going to make space for 3 or 4 minutes of storytelling. So, waiting for hands to go up. Who's got a story to share? All right, we're gonna do Alyssa and then Jason and one more.
I can.
And then Denise. Great. All right, we're gonna start with Alyssa. What's your story, Alyssa?
Okay. Hello, everyone. This story is in the context of being an internal practitioner for a local government, a medium-sized city in Washington State. And I was tasked by the mayor to lead an employee feedback process, which included my favorite liberating structure of all time, TRIZ. And the prompt I asked was, how could we guarantee we could fundamentally fail at being one city? How could we guarantee we would fail? And in one of the sessions, toxic leadership was written on a sticky and like collected and put on the board. And I was like, oh, toxic leadership, that's a big one. When we got to the point where I'm asking, is there anything on this board that resembles things we're doing today? Multiple people pointed at toxic leadership and specifically named the mayor's communications manager as being the most toxic leader in the city, which was wild. And so in the moment, I had to kind of manage the crowd and protect the space of anonymity and the spirit that was intended to be this feedback vessel, and then also kind of convey to this team that I would take the feedback and do what I could to make something of it. And I did tell the mayor that toxic leadership was a talking point in multiple sessions, and that a specific member of her executive team was named. And I didn't say the specifics of who that person was. And I regret that to this day. But the mayor also didn't ask. So I think this was an example of her not being ready to hear. So maybe in that sense, it's better that I didn't say who it was. But I did just learn that that person was removed from her position a month ago. So 3 years later, something came of it. But that was an example of a time when if I had a do-over, I think I would be more direct. But the stakes were very high.
Thanks, Alyssa. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Do you think if you would have said something in that moment, that change might have happened faster, or that maybe they just wouldn't have heard it and glazed over it? I'm just curious.
I think it's probably a combination of both. I think based on what I know of this mayor, I think she would have absolutely refuted the statement or like scoffed at it. Or more likely, she would have said, oh, I bet I could figure out who said that. And she would be more curious about the employee that said it and not about the fact that the employee chose to say it. So, yeah,
Ouch.
sad.
Yeah. Thank you. Jason.
Hey everyone. So my role is I work for a company that sells human capital management systems, and I go and implement those systems with clients that have purchased them. So think of your HR, payroll, benefits, time systems. What often happens during the analysis phase is the client says, hey, sales told us that your product is going to do X, Y, Z. And there are times where I know our product does not do X, Y, Z. And I've been on both sides of the directness coin. I've been on the side where during analysis I will flat out say, no, at this time our functionality doesn't do that. And then I've gotten the feedback of, hey, we're not supposed to say that. We're supposed to always say that we're going to look into it and kind of gloss over it. And then I've been on the other side of that coin where I would not solution right then and there. I would take the requirements back, but 3 months down the line, I'm having the same conversation that I would have had earlier, where it's like, yeah, unfortunately, we can't do that. And so what I do going forward is kind of in context, case by case basis, depending on how the client's receiving us, kind of lets me know when is the most appropriate time to give that feedback. But it's more art than science, and yeah, it can be really challenging.
So do you feel like you're getting kind of pressure from both sides to not tell that truth, both from your organization and from the organization you're working with?
Right. I would rather be more truthful than less. I'd rather be more direct. Um, but I do get pressure from my organization that I work for not to be that direct. We've actually just had a training called positive communication or something along those lines, where it's you never say something like unfortunately, but you say something like currently at this time, we don't offer that. Kind of choosing the right communication style and words to not put a negative impression in the client's mind. And I don't know, that's not really my style. It's something I uh, work on, struggle with, but it always feels like I'm being untruthful in at least a certain way.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Denise.
What you said earlier, Faith, about being able to sit with discomfort and then move through that discomfort, it's there's those are such critical moments, right, in the work that we do, and to do it gracefully and to hope that when we do say it that it's going to work out, right? And Alyssa, I can appreciate what you went through. So I had a similar situation where we just had some feedback sessions for a nonprofit that supports tribes in Western Washington, and then in the South Sound area. And in these listening sessions, they were specifically calling out the HR director, who's non-native, but also former military and also former mental health counselor, who's very direct and abrasive. And I've worked with him, and I think he's great because I can relate. My dad's a retired police officer. Like, I can relate to him, but a lot of folks can't. And this is an organization that has a lot of women. They're very relational. They come to him and he gives them very abrupt answers, or he just tells them what they want to hear, but he doesn't want to listen to their sob stories, is what he says. I don't need to listen to those sob stories to know what policy they're referencing, so I just tell them. I'm like, all right, but also. So in these feedback sessions, we had 2 hours, and this particular group had never had something like this that they could recall. And both sessions went over. One was 3 hours, another was 2 hours and 45 minutes. But that's how much like they wanted to get things off their chest. So, and both said, the HR director. So when I went back to the executive director with all this information, I said, here's some glaring things. Top of the list was this, and 6 out of 10 people said, and 8 out of 10 people said, and then the rest of them were just kind of, they're like, I'm not going to get involved. So I said, we have an issue here. And he's like, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? And I said, what are we going to do about it? Because just because I identify the issue doesn't mean that I'm going to resolve it. I said, so we had to develop strategies. And we're going to jointly have a conversation with him when he gets back from vacation. And then we're going to go into a larger conversation with the whole leadership team. And we're going to talk about all the things, because I'm not hiding it from the report. I didn't hide it from the report that went to the board. And I am going to have a conversation with him as a heads up, and then the conversation with the executive director, the three of us, and then into the larger group. But yeah, it is that sitting with discomfort, being able to move through it in a way that you can still move the truth forward, in a way that respects everyone. And so my strategies are moving towards respecting his strengths and saying where we could start to address things. So
Thank you. You just identified something that I hadn't really thought about as another factor in when we tell that truth is if I say this thing out loud, am I going to now be responsible for it? Right? In a way that may be beyond my contract, right? Or beyond my authority or my purview. And then that creates other relational and systemic challenges, right? Because how we hold and wield power then shifts. Um, and maybe we don't have the authority to fix this thing, but because we said it, people are going to assume that we do have that responsibility. Ooh, sticky wickets. Um, as you were listening to these stories, how many people did you hear something that was familiar to you? Something that you like, oh, yeah, I've heard or dealt with that before. And go ahead, we're a small enough group. Go ahead and come off mute and maybe if you want to just kind of respond to what you heard there.
Hey, it's Jason. The in the last story, the sort of transference of ownership, or the like you were just saying, the tacit, understanding that, oh, now it's your problem to fix, is something that I encounter all the time. Um, and it's just a thing I navigate, that I've gotten used to navigating. And on my very best days, I'm great at it. On my very worst days, it aggravates me. I'm usually somewhere in between.
Thank you.
It's always an interesting challenge to figure out if the client is wanting to engage in checking the box or if they want to engage in actual change based on the findings. And if it's the latter, just naming that it's a very vulnerable thing that often requires them specifically to do something different. And it's tricky. It's hard because there's a recent client signed up for all the change, like so excited for the change, really wanted to get into it. And then when it boiled down, and that was going to be hard, it became a report to the board about how many wonderful boxes were checked. Beautiful box checking.
Beautiful boxes. So checked.
How often, it's what's coming to mind is how often are we creating a relationship with leaders, with our leader clients, right? And setting the expectation or possibility up front that it may not be all the things that you want to hear. I'm not here to this is not what I'm here to do. I'm here to bring you the truth. And that's what I'm going to bring you, whether it's great or not. And how comfortable because I think what set me off was like, how comfortable are you with discomfort? Because if something comes through that is not going to be comfortable, are you willing to hear it?
Yeah, and I think what you've
We
just
make that
named
a
is
practice. Yeah.
yeah, and what you've just named as well, Jacqueline, is this self as instrument, right?
Mhm.
Because it's not just a question of how comfortable is the client with discomfort. It is also us. Because stepping into that discomfort to tell that truth is hard work. And some days, to Jason's point, we're not all as strong and ready every single day in the same equal measure, right? Sometimes we're feeling our oats and we're ready for it and we step into it and we own it. And some days we're like, oh my God, I just want to finish this day. If I open this can, I know it's going to be huge and I don't have the spoons for it right now. I need to go home and get some rest. Maybe I'll tackle this another time, right? And that can feel judicious and strategic. And those are agreements we need to make with ourselves as well as
Yeah.
with the client, right? So I'm going to share again. And I'm just remembering, Jason, our conversation about, I think we had a conversation about spoons at the last conference we were at. I had a friend yesterday go off about how many spoons they do not have at this moment. Which was fun. So things that we're hearing a little bit about, we're hearing about power and accountability and authority, right? Who has it, who holds it, who grants that permission. I think in Alyssa's story in particular, we heard about when the truth lands and the possibility of it being weaponized, right? Like this turning it to like, well, who said that? Ooh, right? That was not the intended room for truth right there. There's fear on both sides of the coin, right? There's fear that we carry with us about losing our authority or autonomy with a client, perhaps losing our job. If we're internal, fear of losing our, maybe freedom to do certain kinds of work. People can get curtailed internally without any sort of formal process, right? And that is something that we need to be aware of all the time. And then I didn't hear this one in our stories, and I'm grateful for it. But self-doubt is also something that can come up. Oh, I think that I heard this, but I'm not sure. Maybe if they all don't see it, maybe I'm just making things up in my head, right? And it's easy to get in that loop, particularly for emerging practitioners and folks who have not had a lot of experience, kind of being in that tricky space. It is another of the workshops that will be happening at the revival. We were all very interested in learning how to be more confident in how we approach clients and just really carrying that confidence and not slipping into the self-doubt. Yeah, Denise.
That was absolutely part of my experience.
Mm.
I just didn't bring it up. But what I find myself doing when I'm just like, oh gosh, do I want to even go there? Then just slowing everything down, right? And then saying, okay, tell me more about this, right? And internally, I'm totally bracing myself like, am I willing to address this? Because I know this is going to be a big thing. If I slow this down and I ask for more information, I'm going to also have to be responsible for dealing with all this, the aftermath of what's to come, right? And then am I capable of managing a conversation with both the executive director and that person, right, in a way that won't put anybody in legal trouble, for one. I was like, what's the risk here? And then also managing my own level of self-awareness, like, am I being biased in any way, or am I influencing the conversation? So also, like all of that's going at the same time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you didn't quite mention, but just because I know the work that you do is related to trauma-informed OD and interventions as well, is we also hold as OD practitioners an internal desire not to cause harm, right? And sometimes the situations that we're stepping into with these organizations are harmful to someone, right? There's as Alyssa said, it's a toxic work situation that is causing people harm. And when we want to tell the truth and get in there and adjust it, sometimes we're taking a band-aid off something that does not feel good, or causes harm in a different way. And so like really having to balance those needs of multiple people. And unfortunately, um, when someone has a very closely held narrative or story, internally about how things are, sometimes telling the truth about how that story isn't true, can feel very harmful. And this is one of those places where it's not our purpose here today, but a thing that I think about a lot is that difference between harm and discomfort. Discomfort is a necessary thing. And sometimes it is a very close border with harm. And sometimes people will perceive it as harmful, particularly those who come from more privilege, will perceive that putting them into an uncomfortable situation as harming them. And that's something that we have to navigate as well. That's a little beyond our scope today, but definitely something that's part of this conversation, right? So if we admit, and I would actually going to change this slide too, because I say it is about courage, it's also about design. One of the wonderful things that we know as organization development practitioners is that process and design can create opportunities for new outcomes. That we don't have to carry that all in our own, like innovation and intuition and all that stuff. We can build structures to help us. And that's what we're going to lean into today. So for most of the rest of our time today, we are going to be invited to work in small groups and to create a tool that would help you or others in our field to be better able to tell truth to power. Not just from our own wherewithal, but with a tool, with a structure. And I'll give an example. I think maybe it was Jacqueline that you were saying a little earlier, talking about did we set the expectations right for change? So most of us are aware of what contracting is, right? There's like we have an actual contract. But when you're starting a project, whether internally or externally, you'll often sit down with your prime person and also just do some contracting. What are the expectations here, right? Let's really nail down our scope. Let's look at our timeline. Peter Block, in his book Flawless Consulting, has a whole section on doing good contracting before you get started because it really precludes a lot of assumptions that can create communications and information shortfalls, process shortfalls, all of those things. So here's an idea. What if we created a template for a truth clause? And then every time we go in with a client, we negotiate up front an agreement on how we're going to handle difficult truths. Right? And there's maybe one of the questions there, Kelly, is as you're doing that, you're asking the client directly, are we checking boxes here? Or are you ready for the real change with the absolute certainty that the real change is going to be hard, uncomfortable, and probably a little bit messy? So let's set it right up front, right? And maybe there's something that you walk through then if you send that template, it says, okay, the client says that they are medium to high comfortable with truth telling. What do we agree to do and how do we agree to handle it when the truth that I'm bringing pushes them beyond that? Is there a certain kind of conversation? Do we agree that when that happens, they're going to let us know and we're going to set aside time for a dialogue, right? We're not just going to blow past it. Are there steps that we can set up? Are there agreements that we can make, right? That will set up a process for dealing with hard truths in those moments when they arise, so that when you get there, you're not having to make it all up. You say, hey, remember we agreed about this? And this is what we said we were going to do, so let's do that. Right? Um, Not unlike, has anybody here ever done any work with restorative justice?
Haven't worked with it, but I'm familiar with it because I studied it as part of my research for something. Yeah.
So it's similar, and Kelly, I've got some thumbs up. It's similar to that when you're doing work with restorative justice. There's an agreement about how you're going to proceed. There's a set of steps, and having those structures creates just a little cushion of comfort in that uncertainty and discomfort, right? Says, I don't know what's going on. This feels super uncomfortable, but at least I understand the steps that we agreed to, right? And that can create some leeway. So maybe that's one of the tools that somebody would like to work on and build today. A truth clause for contracting. Another one is, and I've never seen anything quite like this, so I think it would have to be developed, and it's not the expectation that the whole thing get developed today. The expectation is that you think about it and be like, hey, would this tool work? What about a truth readiness assessment? Right? We've talked a little bit about what if they're just not ready to hear, um, or ready to hear this specific thing, or um, to the point that Kelly was saying earlier, like they thought that they were ready and they weren't checking boxes, but when we actually got there, right? So that was a self-reporting of readiness. Maybe we as OD practitioners should have something in our pocket that is a truth readiness assessment. What kind of questions would we ask to be able to get a clear idea of how actually ready the client is for those hard truths? And these are just two ideas that have come up over the course of, kind of thinking and winging through some of these labs over the last couple of months. I would love to give you a couple. We're going to take just a minute, 60 to 75 seconds. And I'd love you to think about what else might be on a list like this. What else?
I don't know if it's the clause or the readiness, but I'm just thinking about a truth conversation. Like, how am I gonna talk with my client, head client right up front? What are some questions that I'm gonna ask? And because it's part of building the trust piece, right? But I like the clause, I like the readiness assessment, but to me it's more about an initial
More
one of the
relational.
first conversations before you get into contracting and stuff like that.
Let's do a first conversation. It could also, I heard in what you're suggesting, be almost like a flashcard for when there are moments that difficult truths arise, and saying, this is how I'm going to go through this because I know that this works, right?
Or maybe I'm thinking of, having a discussion about what is our agreement, because here's where I'm at. We can come up with a truth clause, but I don't know that one size fits all. I mean, it may come close, but to me, I would want to have a conversation with my client about agreeing on how we're going to do that, and then have that be the clause. So to me, it's like, what are the questions that we need to address with the client pretty much up front before we get into everything? Am I?
And you see that as before contracting even?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I guess the thought that's percolating for me, Faith, is that we're operating from a perspective that we know an absolute truth. And I find more often that in most of the examples that I've heard, We've heard someone's story that is true for them, and how do we surface that story in an organization where we also know there are other stories that may not align to that story? And how do we do that in a way that protects the individuals who have the stories and validates their experiences? Yep, that's their real experience. They're experiencing toxic leadership. It's having an impact on them. That's true for them, whether that's what the leader intended or not. And there's probably more to the story than just that person's experience, or even if it's multiple persons' experience. So I was hearing maybe, Jacqueline, this is a little where you were going with it. How do we have an exploring hard truths conversation in which we create a space for surfacing the conflicting stories and all of us becoming wiser and understanding more about the various dimensions that all need to come forward for there to be sort of truth and reconciliation?
Yes.
And if I merge kind of, Rick, what you're saying with what Jacqueline was saying, then it's almost a um, naming and like an intentional dialogue around truth and perspective.
Hey, it's Jason. I have a book on my bookshelf. I can't find it right now. It was written by two professors who, when they engage in a project, they sit down with the person or persons they're going to be working with, and they sign a type of contract that details what their responsibilities are to each other. And so when we were talking about the truth clause, it made me think of that as being maybe another half step in that direction, where you actually specifically say it's my responsibility to you to be truthful and surface if it's agreed upon, right? If it's agreed upon,
Yeah.
but having it be written in a way that it shows that it's a person's responsibility to do that.
So just playing off of what Rick was talking about, because that's I hear what it's kind of rattling around my brain, that is it truth that we're talking about, or is it uncomfortable experiences, perspectives? Like, we know that we're kind of in the truth space, but I fear it more being honest about what we're hearing and what we need, the difficult things that we're going to have to work through. But I like that Rick kind of clarified that it's, these are perspectives that we're getting, and they maybe there's 80% of people when you do a survey, because we got, I've been called in because companies see some things dropping off on their survey and they're like, "Ooh, what's going on there?" And we had to go around and dig around on that. And it was very interesting. Luckily, the powers that be were very wanting to know, so it wasn't a difficult conversation, but they didn't make it hard to tell them, because I was literally flat out asked, "Is this reaching our clients?" And I'm like, it sounds like it is. And so they picked it up the ball and ran with it. But
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean?
right, I mean, at the end of the day, although OD professionals are, of course, very smart people, that does not mean that we are necessarily um, automatically owners of truth. And I think that's maybe what Rick's getting at a little bit. And then
Yeah,
that
that's
there's
what I'm
room
hearing. Yeah,
for humility and diversity of experience as well,
yeah.
right? There
But
are
that
things
is
that are,
difficult, right?
yeah, there are things that are more straight across truth things like, hey, it is true that 80% of the people in the room said this
Mhm.
and are experiencing that. That is a truth.
Yeah.
Right. There can be things that we uncover. And I think one of the places where this gets difficult, and I see your hand, Alyssa, is that one of the places where it's hardest to um, say a difficult thing is if that difficult thing is about the leader who is our client, right? So you have identified XYZ problems in your organization, and you think this is what's causing these problems, but a large assessment and diagnosis and multiple interviews and insights have led to a different idea about what the problem is, and it's you, buddy. Right? Like that's a hard one. Anyway, this just yeah, Alyssa?
I think Rick brings up a really good point, and I'm so curious how that would interface with contracting also, because your point, Rick, is not lost on me that that leader who was known and reputed as being very, very toxic was a part of a system. And the system that she was a part of was related directly to the mayor as a leader, right? And as an internal person, I had the bandwidth or capacity to kind of work that problem from multiple sides. And what I got to see from my perspective was that this really toxic leader was heavily driven by fear. And her fear was driving the behaviors that were showing up as toxicity to the people around her. But that fear was a manifestation of how the mayor was leading her. So I get it. You bring up such a good point. And my thought about that was in a contracting situation, how do you leave like wiggle room for those broader systemic diagnostic efforts when something like this comes out of left field? It's like, yes, when a truth is uncovered and we need to be able to tell it, but what's the follow on of the telling and how does that action, how do we make space for that action is something that now I'm like super curious to think about.
Well, and maybe that's one of the tools, isn't Alyssa, as much about what happens before as about what happens after. Like maybe the question is, and again, I'm trying to lean into tools, right? So maybe it's a template or a checklist for what we do when hard things come up, right? Okay, this hard thing has come up and we're not going to ignore it and we're not going to go around it. We're going to sit in it.
Through
What
it.
does that look like, right? What are the actions that we agree to take together to dig through it and get to the other side? And I'm not sure, I'm trying to find a short name for that tool, and it's going to be the discomfort
One frame that has been helpful in addressing this kind of stuff
analysis tool.
is it's a get real process,
Mm.
which makes room for there to be multiple realities, but we have to get to what's real for you and we have to get to what's real for me and surface that data and process it, understand the system, all that stuff. There's complexity.
Yeah. We want to make
I think your two categories, Faith, are great categories to work with, though. I mean, I think all this discussion could fit into a contracting discussion or a tool we can use when we're encountering one, whatever we call it.
what I heard Jason speaking to was really leaning into agreements. We're thinking about that agile agreements, which could also be a part of contracting, setting those agreements up front about what you're going to have. So how do you frame that? What does that look like? So right now I have 4 breakout rooms. One is the truth clause or contracting or agreements. Once you get in there, play with it, make it your own. Whatever it ends up being is what it ends up being. There's the truth readiness assessment. What are the questions that you ask, right? To get to this place where you're like, oh, I understand based on these questions how ready this client is to talk about some difficult things. And maybe it's even truth readiness, it's difficulty readiness, right? If we don't want to just name it truth. And then I've got intentional dialogue on truth and perspective. So does that happen before? Does it happen after? Is there a process that you set up? Is there um, a timeline? Does it include uh, like pre-writing on your own so that you come with something and you're not just winging it with somebody in a space where you're very uncomfortable? Like, what can you build into a process or a tool, a template, a diagnosis is something? And then the last one is what we're calling the get real process, the discomfort analysis tool. Um, I think those four would give us some cool stuff. And so what I am going to do is I am going to open rooms for the next like 25 minutes. Yep, that'll take us right to the end. Ooh, let's do 20 minutes. Sorry, I meant for this to be longer, but we had a really nice discussion right here. Denise, yes.
One more thing is coming up for me, and that is, what if we built it into the conversational norms when we enter into the space together, right? That could be somebody else's component, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is that? What is it? What does that line, those 5 simple agreements look like? But what does it look like in practice also? So
Yeah, I think I would add that into, I think that could go in with the truth clause, contracting agreements, norms. Usually we set norms with those agreement templates. But yeah, you can change it up. So I am going to open these rooms and you are going to go into them. You can choose which one you go into. And then if you want to pick someone in your group to be a note taker, to just basically kind of capture what it is you are designing as this new organization development tool to help others navigate this better. Does everybody know how to join the rooms?
Mhm.
Okay, go forth and conquer.
Where are the rooms?
If you click on the rooms down at the bottom,
It's not giving me that.
I can just add you to a room, Kelly. Which one
Yeah,
would you
put
like
me
to
through.
do?
Oh, I see breakout rooms, but you can just shove me in one.
No, which one would you like to be in?
I don't care. I like all of this. It's juicy. I'm
Okay,
here to
well,
cheerlead for you,
I'm
girl.
gonna put you in a room with Ty then,
Okay, great.
because they're there by themselves at the moment.
Okay, great.
Woo! Hi, welcome back. See a lot of smiles, a little sweat beading on the forehead. Oof, tough. All right, how'd that go?
All right, and Dick, Manal, I'm gonna hand it over to you. I'll get it started and then hand it over to you because you kind of had the layout.
All right, so we're gonna start with Jacqueline's group then. We just have a couple of minutes, so just high
So
overhead. What'd you do?
I'll say, so we resisted being prescriptive about the truth clause of what the truth clause should say, but it's more around and it was funny because I used Otter just to kind of listen in and see what it came up with, and it talked about managing sensitive findings clause is what we kind of came up with, because sensitive kind of covers whatever it could be, right? It doesn't necessarily be difficult, but there's a lot of covering. And what we came down to was discussing and documenting the framework. It would start off with discussing and documenting the framework for presenting results. And then I'm going to hand it over to Manal because she had it. There's a list that she works with. There's something the way that she works that I really appreciated, that we really appreciated.
That
And
was
then
like a
Jason can jump in.
smooth handoff. Smooth
That's
handoff.
that's right.
We had a really like rich discussion. So thank you so much, Jason and Jacqueline for that. But we kind of started off with the main question, like if the work, like I'm very much a proactive person, probably because I got burned so many times that that right now I try to be proactive, and so I really try to have the conversations beforehand. And so I'll really ask the client even before the work begins, like if the work surfaces something difficult, inconvenient, sensitive, or different from what we expected, how do we want to handle it together? And then I'll just kind of go through a series of questions, and some of these questions will be like how. Like we'll agree on things like how difficult findings will be raised, who needs to hear them and when. Like sometimes certain folks don't necessarily need to hear them. How confidential and vulnerable voices will be protected, what happens if we interpret the evidence differently, how dissenting perspectives will be preserved, and who has like final editorial authority. So if like we're producing a report, what cannot be removed from the record. And so it really just is an upfront contracting conversation that kind of establishes how difficult findings, disagreements, and pressure to soften the truth will be held. And then Jason kind of raised a really interesting point around, you know, how do we, like some folks have really hard feelings about certain types of facts, and how do we create a space that allows for that to be heard. And so I just offered the framework of ORID, and it's kind of stolen from like the technology of participation facilitation method. And it's just a very structured way to have a difficult conversation. So first we talk about kind of like the objective level data, so just the facts, so everybody kind of agrees on the facts. Then Jason's kind of question around like the feelings aspect of it. So that's the reflective. And so what are things that you resonate with the data, and what are things that are causing like discomfort? And so we can have that honest conversations. And then interpretive. So that's the sense making. And then finally, like you want to have a conversation with a decision point. And so the D is decision, like what do we want to do about it? Right. So it really is a structured way to kind of have that hard conversation. So yeah, that's what we discussed.
I love it. That's awesome. And so the invitation, this is a sample lab, right? We're learning. I should have done less talking up front and left more time for this at the end, learning.
No.
And the invitation is for you guys to, if you haven't completed this, if you're willing to, share your email addresses with each other in the chat. Follow up. And then when we get to the conference, once into and created, you would be invited to finish, and then it would be published on the Good Work Collective site as an open source OD tool with you all as the creators. You created this, right? And a link to your LinkedIn in a way that helps build um, resonance and cred for you as a creator and a problem solver. That's awesome. I want to make room for Rick and Alyssa and Denise.
We didn't decide on who was
Go
going to talk about.
crazy.
We kind of
Who would
talked
like-
about a layering of several models, really, all with the end goal of encouraging self-awareness and reflection. And Denise and Rick have been working on one since I think they said 2023 that has possibility for inclusion and would make a lot of sense. We also talked about
Wow.
John Wallen's interpersonal gap and the belief cycle, which is that your beliefs generate your thoughts and your thoughts generate feelings and those feelings generate action. And then that action tends to confirm what you already believed, and how that kind of feeds into this process very well. So we didn't get super far, but we all agreed we were keen to kind of keep this conversation going so we can actually come up with a product of some kind. So that was the other learning we have for you, Faith, is that what happens when we get into these labs and we don't have time to fully resolve the issue or get to the end goal. and having some kind of an idea for people to contain or continue that work moving forward and what that might look like.
And I would just share just in a sentence, two
Yeah,
sentences
I
maybe.
think there's some things that
It
we'll
was,
learn. Mhm.
sorry. It was surprising how personal and deep it got right away.
Nice.
And
Yeah, I think one of the things
I'll add,
from a facility. Go ahead, Denise.
I think there's a lag in somewhere. But I just wanted to note, because we didn't get to this, but the idea we had was born out of conflict that Rick and I had, where I'll speak for myself. I was very upset at Rick, and I didn't want to be in spaces with him. And so that's why when I joke about this process being born years ago, it's because we've worked through a lot of things, and a lot of things were mine to own. Right. So, yeah, we both learned and grown.
That's such a rich offering into this conversation to have that history and yeah. I think from a perspective for those of you who are leading labs, my learning is I would have set the table a little faster, and trusted your stories to carry us more. Because when we got into everybody telling their stories, it just automatically opened up and took a little bit more time. And I could have just really gotten into that more quickly. And then I think in the future, if I was doing this, I would have a Google Doc or something ready for you that you would tap into so that you already had something to write on or use so that you'd be more likely to start capturing. And maybe even if I knew that we were leaning into a clause or a framework or something, some starts of templates that then people could add into, and that's more likely to get further towards a product, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's a great opportunity for everyone to follow up with each other and keep creating and being friends. Because that's also part of why we're bringing people together. We're not coming together for 4 days and then it's done. We want to create community that lasts and keeps giving. So, uh, before we leave and check out, Kelly and Ty.
Ty and I had a stunning and beautiful conversation centered around building agreement, um, and allowing people to not participate. Our conversation really ranged from how how to include and define elements of uh, transformative justice and um, or not. And we got into a little bit into the weeds around how we let people join and what is expected of people when they join, and how is accountability held, and how do we invite and make it explicitly known that if you're a part of this engagement, there's an expectation of participation and all of that side of it. And if you need to no longer be a part of it, that there's a built-in mechanism for that, and a way to rejoin and leave. So and so many other things. Ty, jump in here. I've gotten into ramble soup.
We also talked about mapping interferences and pressures, things that might externally affect kind of what truth-telling, candor, and courageous conversation could look like.
I love that. So I think rich conversations, the beginnings of some great tools and templates, hopefully the beginning of new relationships and the deepening of some existing relationships. And then were we already at OD Out Loud, you would go right now and take a 20-minute break and breathe, and maybe talk about it in the hallway, uh, eat some food, and then get ready to have a dojo. And then tomorrow you would do this again, right? So you do at least 3 times on these pressure cooker labs to really think up new things, doing some deeper dives in your dojo work. Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. Thanks, everybody. Be
Thank
well. Hopefully
Thanks,
you're
everyone. Take care.
chat. I did record this, so if anybody wants to look back on it, let me know and I'll share that recording out with you.
Take care.
Sounds
Please.
great. Have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. This was amazing.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Faith. Appreciate you. Hey, Faith.